The next cryptid we will be divulging today is one of the most well documented to date. Despite this, its true nature is still poorly understood, and there have been many difficulties in tracking and eliminating the threat of the entity completely due to its ubiquitous nature. The entity is described as having the appearance of a fully uniformed technical worker that would have been stationed at the now decommissioned Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Ukraine. It is completely incorporeal, taking no physical damage from any corporeal object and being unable to deal any direct physical damage to objects. Despite this, the entity possesses an ability that allows it to achieve destructive capabilities that are almost inescapable for a normal person. The entity has the distinct ability to cause any form of matter to act as if it were a highly unstable isotope of itself, giving it a half-life of 1 to 2 seconds. This causes extremely fast radioactive decay in any object or organism the entity chooses, and there is no known limit in its ability to do this. In one instance, the entity caused a hospital that was 20 miles away from its current location to collapse within 1 minute due to radioactive decay. This attack was later covered up as problems with the structural integrity of the hospital. The entity appears in, as it is currently understood, almost random patterns, usually targeting small areas and even singular people, but it tends to favor public structures such as sewer systems and roads, or power plants that utilize non-renewable technology to produce energy. It is currently believed that the entity was created on April 25, 1990, exactly 4 years after the meltdown of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, when Grigory Belkin, a nuclear scientist who often studied Chernobyl and other phenomena, came into contact with a large mass of radioactive corium, colloquially known as the elephant's foot. During brief contact with the mass of corium, the individual's atomic structure was altered by several supernatural forces also present within the facility, including several cryptids created by the initial meltdown of the power plant that are now in the custody of the Russian government. While most research within the paranormal community and the database have been purely speculative, there is evidence to suggest that the entity is an imperfect quantum copy of the original Grigory Belkin. The creation of this entity is likely a result of supernatural activity that conjured a collection of matter that possesses an altered quantum state from that of Grigory Belkin that allows it to change the state of any form of matter around it, but also makes it completely intangible to almost all normal forms of matter. Attempts to contact Grigory Belkin have failed. He was last known to have been recruited by the Soviet government in order to study the supernatural elements surrounding the Chernobyl plant. Reports previously indicated that due to a declining health condition from age and radiation poisoning, Grigory Belkin has retired. However, new reports indicated otherwise. Reports on Grigory Belkin indicate that the entity becomes fully tangible and vulnerable when exposed to the following materials. 1. The original material of the elephant's foot. Or 2. Potassium chloride. If exposed to the original material of the elephant's foot, the entity will be reduced to a fully physical form and will become able to be physically damaged. This effect is lessened when using potassium chloride, but the entity seems to show an extreme aversion to both materials regardless. If spread around an area, potassium chloride has the ability to completely ward off the entity. Of note, the entity has been exterminated at least 5 times before. Through usage of the previously mentioned materials, certain groups have managed to force the entity into physical form and completely destroy it on several occasions. However, once destroyed, the entity will invariably reform in a randomly determined location somewhere on planet Earth on April 25 of the next year. Due to this, the entity cannot be formally eliminated, but its attacks can be delayed or even neutralized if it can be consistently tracked and destroyed whenever it reforms. So far, it appears that the Russian and US governments have been working with several independent organizations such as the Lazarus Initiative in order to ensure the continued containment of this entity's attacks. Research into the history of the entity is not entirely sparse. The first known contact with it was when members of the Soviet military engaged the entity on May 10, 1990 within the wilderness surrounding Chernobyl. Due to the danger of being exposed to hazardous materials within the Chernobyl exclusion zone and the intangible nature of the entity preventing it from taking damage from conventional weaponry, the military was forced to retreat after encountering it. At this time the entity's weaknesses were completely unknown, and it was deemed unstoppable. The entity's weaknesses were first discovered during an exploration of the Chernobyl power plant on July 20, 1990. A team of 30 Russian scientists and soldiers equipped with protective gear attempted to breach into the reactor room. While attempting to do so, they encountered the entity, which appeared to be even more hostile than usual. The team suffered 22 casualties from this attack before entering reactor room 217, in which the elephant's foot is located. Once the remaining team members entered, the entity seemed to ignore them almost completely. The team began to suspect that there was something about the room that protected them and investigated. Realizing that the room contained the elephant's foot, the team contacted reinforcements and used specialized equipment to gather a sample of the corium mass. Because the suits did not offer proper protection, the team was eventually forced to risk exiting the chamber to face the entity. Due to the properties of the corium sample, the entity was rendered fully vulnerable to the team's attacks. A short fight broke out in which the entity struck and killed 3 of the remaining team members, destroying their molecular structures. The remaining team members managed to incapacitate the entity using continuous gunfire. With the entity's concentration focused on the other team members, it was unable to destroy the bullets fired toward it, and it was captured and contained by the 5 remaining members of the team. 2 hours later, reinforcements arrived and proceeded to terminate the entity. Attempts have been made to permanently contain the entity, with holding cells being devised by several researchers that integrate the use of corium from the elephant's foot and potassium chloride. However, attempts to do so have resulted in the entity merely terminating itself via its own ability, meaning it is aware that it will revive if it is destroyed. Update: as of March 11, 2019, the entity returned to life earlier than the expected date to re-emerge despite its previous destruction by the Russian government on June 8, 2018. This is likely related to recent reports that Grigory Belkin. Warning: update to Cryptid advisory. Do not under any circumstances use potassium chloride in any attempts to repel the entity. Avoid thinking about the Chernobyl power plant or Grigory Belkin for any longer than 5 minutes. Please stand by for further updates. But do not contemplate the contents of this document for an uninterrupted period of time lasting longer than 2 minutes. It is watching. Grigory is watching.